Hi, Etty.
Hello, how are you?
I am well. How are you? Happy World Accreditation Day.
Happy World Accreditation Day. Thank you. I'm fine. And you?
I am very well, thank you.
Excellent. Excellent.
Good
Good luck.
afternoon, everyone, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this platform.
Ready?
Good afternoon.
The Honorable Shaw, Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce. The Honorable Dr. Norman Dunn, State Minister in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Sansia Bennett Kennedy, also in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Ms. Etta Fellow, Chairman of the International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation. Mr. Simon Roberts, Chairman of JANAAC's Accreditation Council, and may I also acknowledge all the other members of JANAAC's Accreditation Council in the same breath, as I also acknowledge Ms. Sharon May Shirley, the effervescent and very hard-working CEO of the Jamaica National Agency for Accreditation, Mrs. Gabrielle Andrade Bell, Quality Manager and Lead Assessor with JANAAC, to all our expert panelists who will be joining us in today's Accredicast. We have with us Mr. Christopher Corbin, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Frank Comito, Mrs. Eleanor Jones, and Mr. Anthony McKenzie. We'll learn a little bit more about them, their work, in the discussion segment of our program. But I also want to acknowledge all persons joining us live on social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, also on the ministry's page for the second in a two-part series of JANAAC's Accredicast Quality Management Series. It is World Accreditation Day, ladies and gentlemen, and we're celebrating the importance of accreditation in building global quality infrastructure. It is significant that we should be coming to you on such a day, which, yesterday was World Oceans Day. And so our discussion today will surround climate change and the impacts that it has on regional economic growth and development. But we also want to talk a little bit about how it is that accreditation plays a critical role in ensuring that we do have a robust society that pays attention to climate change imperatives. Jamaica, for example, has as one of its nationally determined contributions the reduction of greenhouse gases by up to 60% by the year 2030. And in the latest climate summit that was held, convened by Joe Biden, one of the speakers emphasized that if we are serious about 1.5 degrees, we must be serious about NDCs, nationally determined contributions, as we want to ensure that we do not go beyond the 1.5 degrees Celsius that is globally determined for us to ensure that we are in keeping with those measures, reducing the impacts of climate change, ensuring that our climate is as it should be and not beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to invite Ms. Shirley to come with the official welcome as we proceed in this program.
Thank you, Darren. Honorable Audley Shaw, Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce. The Honorable Dr. Norman Dunn, Minister of State in the same ministry, and our Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Sancia Bennett Templar. It is my pleasure to welcome Mrs. Etty Feller, Chair of the International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation, a friend and colleague, Mr. Simon Roberts, Chair of JANAAC, and all our council members, our expert panelists, Mr. Christopher Corbin, Program Officer, UN Environment Program, Cartagena Convention Secretariat, Mr. Frank Comito, Special Advisor and former CEO, Director General, Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, Mrs. Eleanor Jones, a very dear colleague and friend, Chairman and CEO, Environmental Solutions Limited, Mr. Anthony McKenzie, Director, Environmental Management and Conservation Division, NEPA, our able moderator, Darren Miller, Mrs. Gabrielle Andrade Bell, Quality Manager for JANAAC, our specially invited guests, members of the media, good afternoon. And may I also add my own happy World Accreditation Day. It is my distinct pleasure today to welcome you to JANAAC's celebration of World Accreditation Day under the theme, Accreditation, supporting the achievement of this UN Sustainable Development Goals. Today, we join partners worldwide in highlighting the value that accreditation play in promoting stable, inclusive, and sustainable societies and economies. The path to sustainable development is arduous, we can all agree, but it is indeed achievable and requires our integrated and collective action, ensuring that those furthest behind are given a fighting chance to succeed. Whether it is climate action or the achievement of other sustainable development goals, the JANAAC stands ready to work with all our stakeholders in Jamaica and the region to develop resilient and sustainable nations. As an agency of our portfolio ministry, the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, we remain unrelenting in our mission to provide internationally recognized accreditation services to facilitate market access, enhance competitiveness, and consumer well-being through improved stakeholder confidence in the quality and integrity of the goods and services supplied. That's our mission, and we are proud of it. JANAAC's accredited cabs are in 8 Caribbean states, and we directly support at least 6 of the UN SDGs. Let me pause for a moment to just focus on a few facts. And this is not because I'm partial, having served in the environmental management sector for well over 20 years. I certainly declare interest. But the UN states that 3 in 10 people lack access to safe drinking water supplies. And approximately 6 in 10 people lack access to safely managed sanitation facilities. And this results in millions of people dying from waterborne diseases each year. The accredited analytical testing of water, whether it is potable water, whether it's recreational or wastewater samples, by competent personnel in our accredited labs will help to preserve the safety and health of all people, not just Jamaicans and not just our Caribbean brothers and sisters, but all humankind global. JANAAC also accredits sampling. So we accredit the sampling programs. And this means that this very crucial step in allowing samples to be fit for purpose is a part of this process. It is estimated that by 2030, the number of deaths and illnesses from hazardous chemicals and air, water, and soil pollution contamination should be substantially reduced. Accreditation of testing, inspection, and certification activities involved in this process will allow this objective to be realized. In our efforts to emerge stronger from the shadows of the COVID-19 global health crisis, we must consider the actions we must take to create better outcomes for future generations. How can we align national socio-economic policies and programs to quality-led, results-driven systems of accountability, transparency, and impartiality? I posit that the answer lies squarely in a robust quality infrastructure system with accreditation-based conformity assessment services at its center. CARICOM has mandated the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center to mainstream climate change adaptation strategies into the sustainable development agendas of the Caribbean states. The aim of doing this is to reinforce both the socioeconomic and technological as well as environmental resilience of CARICOM states. Here again, accreditation plays a crucial role, supporting trade, healthcare, food safety, environmental management, energy conservation, among others. We look forward to working with more public and private sector CABs in achieving their national and regional prosperity goals to create a healthier, safer world for all of us to live, work, and raise families. The Jamaica we want. Once again, a warm, very warm welcome to all of you, our guests, streaming live on the various social media platforms. We thank you, and I look forward to an energetic and engaged discussion. God bless you all. Thank you.
Indeed, Ms. Shirley, and thank you so much for your continued good stewardship of the Jamaica National Agency for Accreditation. The International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation the ILAC, is the international organization for accreditation bodies operating in accordance with ISO IC 17011 and involved in the accreditation of conformity assessment bodies, including calibration labs, testing labs, medical testing laboratories, inspection bodies, proficiency testing providers, and reference material producers. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us all the way from Israel, its chairman, Ms. Etty Feller, who will come with us now at this point in our program to bring greetings. As we make her welcome, please, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Etty Feller.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to take part in this event and an honor to represent ILAC and the international community in this event. Today, June 19th, 2021, Quality Infrastructure Celebrate, worldwide celebration of World Accreditation Day. This year, we support the implementation of the NU Sustainable Development Goal. There are 17 SDGs we seek to guide all goals, regional, national, and international. We should take part in this implementation. Accreditation of conformity assessment is one of the key elements to help market surveillance in critical points as well as on a daily basis. Accreditation provides policymakers, business, and other stakeholders with technical knowledge and capacity to strengthen the implementation, measurement, and monitoring all the objectives and targets contained in the SDGs and support to achieve them on a daily basis. Accreditation support policy, including cross-border trade, food safety, as was mentioned previously, water, health, especially at the last 18 months, environment protection, and industrial and infrastructure development all around the world. ILAC and IAF celebrate together this World Accreditation Day. We work closely as strategical partners in technical cooperation together with the UN. World Accreditation Day celebrate around the world provide an opportunity for ILAC and all our members to explain how accreditation support and how it meets the goal of competent people that will perform our testing, inspection, and calibration in our daily life. World Accreditation Day help us to increase the awareness, addressing health and safety concerns, and improve the general overall quality of the output in an economy. In order to promote ILAC, its member on the from the regions and all the 106 economies that are part of ILAC MRA, ILAC is also working under the umbrella of INET QI, which is a consortium of 14 international organizations in order to explain and to promote the MRA between all organizations such as the World Bank, WTO, UNIDO, WADA, and so forth. I want to also mention that we have a database, a library, an international library, publicsectorassurance.org and businessbenefit.org, which show examples from around the world how accreditation promotes the safety, the regulation, and the trade around the world. We support the developing countries. We have to look wide, far and beyond, which means fisheye, to make sure that we look at all areas around us in order to deliver a better, to live a better world and to deliver good service as accreditation bodies. Happy World Accreditation Day. Stay safe, and thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Fellow. Very insightful, very important discussions that we are having today. And of course, we're very grateful to you for your own stewardship of the International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation. He needs no introduction, ladies and gentlemen. The Honorable Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce will now come to us, bringing remarks. Many of you may have heard him this morning, as we are simultaneously having a live outside broadcast on RGR, and he was speaking about the importance of accreditation and the work of JANAAC. Do please make him welcome as he comes at this time. Minister Audley Shaw.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Miller. Chairperson of the International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation, Ms. Eddie Feller, the Chief Executive Officer of JANAAC, Ms. Sharon May Shirley, the expert panelists that are being engaged today, our quality manager for JANAAC, Mrs. Gabrielle Andrade Bell, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to join our agency, the Jamaica National Agency for Accreditation, JANAAC, in observance of World Accreditation Day 2021. Today's event is being recognized in over 90 countries across the world, highlighting how accreditation supports the delivery of improved regulatory frameworks, good governance, fair markets, effective procurement, and public confidence across industries. The theme for today's event, climate change, impacts on regional economic growth and development, is being observed within the context of sustainable climate action, more specifically, attaining development goal number 13 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. I commend the chairman, the CEO, and her team for organizing this event and for your demonstrated commitment to keeping issues of accreditation on the national agenda. I urge all private and public sector laboratories, inspection bodies, and certification bodies to improve your service delivery and marketability through JANAAC's accreditation service. Accreditation services underpin environmental performance by reducing contamination, greenhouse gases, controlling waste and pollution, so as to safeguard the well-being of consumers and the wider public, and support the effective management and the conservation of natural resources, which impact several productive sectors. Confirmation of competence can only be achieved through accreditation by JANAAC, one of my agencies that continues to cement its global competence and commitment to excellence. You know, it is said that in the pursuit of excellence, one person and one company can make a difference. JANAAC is showing us that. Accreditation supports the response to major environmental protection issues in the region, while advancing practical solutions and a resonant call to action across industry and civil society. Research on global warming carried out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has predicted that average global temperatures could increase between 1.4 and 5.8 degrees centigrade by the year 2100. This is a cause for concern, and we need to address these predicted rising temperatures with alacrity. Climate change is everyone's business. The benefits and costs of climate change on society are expected to vary widely based both on location and scale. However, the net effects are likely to be more devastating for small island developing states. According to the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, 25% of the island's population lives in coastal areas where 90% of its total income is also produced. Many other Caribbean countries are similarly at significant risk due to their geography, dependence on agriculture and tourism. In fact, according to the World Travel and Tourism Council, the Caribbean is the most tourist-intensive region in the world. They predict that the Caribbean will become the most at-risk tourist destination in the world between 2025 and 2050. In light of the foregoing, what future can the region reasonably anticipate if measures are not universally adopted and maintained to better protect our natural resources, especially as they play such a vital role in economic growth and development? In collaboration with other quality infrastructure institutions, such as metrology, standardization, conformity assessment, and market surveillance. Accreditation provides the technical foundations that are critical to the functioning of developed and developing societies, enabling them to meet development and environmental imperatives. Building awareness on environmental issues plays a critical role in influencing public support and stewardship to improve the conservation and management of the natural and built environment. Caribbean states must therefore develop integrated approaches to mitigate risk and create climate resilient societies. Creation of the Jamaica we want means protecting the Jamaica we have. It is our responsibility to occupy until Jesus comes. Luke 19, verse 13. Being good stewards of planet Earth so that we safeguard our people, protect our planet, and be prosperous. Happy World Accreditation Day, and God bless you all. Thank you very much.
The COVID-19 pandemic has come ashore, and with very little warning. As nations fight to lower the curve, we are also faced with a man-made disaster of global scale, our greatest threat in thousands of years, but about which we have been warned. Climate change. If we do not take action, the collapse of whole civilizations and extinction of much of the natural world is imminent. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly on September 25, 2015, is a broad and ambitious plan of action. At its core are 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets, with the overarching objective of leaving no one behind. Accreditation, in collaboration with other quality infrastructure, including metrology, standardization, conformity assessment, and market surveillance, provides the technical foundations critical to the functioning of developed and developing societies. Through support of the UN SDGs, Accreditation adopts an integrated approach to economic growth and development, in which environmental sustainability is key. Climate change, impacts on regional economic growth and development. It is so graphic, isn't it? But I think it really encapsulates our reality. It really speaks to the heart of what we speak about when we speak about climate change and addressing those mitigation and adaptation concerns. Of course, we understand the role that accreditation plays in ensuring that organizations that are supposed to ensure that they too play a role in climate change and mitigation is actually carrying out their functions. Watchdogs, as you will, the Jamaica National Agency for Accreditation has certainly done a lot in this regard, but it's important too for many countries across the world to put in place their own nationally determined contributions. What will you do in your region, in your part of the world, in your community to ensure that you are addressing these climate change and mitigation concerns? And that is what we're speaking about this morning, this afternoon. We have persons all across the world joining us. There are also persons joining us at this time. I must acknowledge them on RJR 94 FM for our live outside broadcast on this World Accreditation Day. Now, as we get into the discussion segment of our Accredicast Quality Management Series, I want to introduce to you this time our panelists, persons from different sectors of society who have been contributing to the development of our world, certainly insofar as climate change is concerned. We have with us, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Christopher Corbin, who is the program manager of the United Nations Environment Program's Cartagena Convention Secretariat. There's also Mr. Frank Comito, special advisor and former CEO, Director General of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association. Mrs. Eleanor Jones is chairman and CEO of Environmental Solutions Limited. And Mr. Anthony McKenzie, Director of Environmental Management and Conservation at the National Environment and Planning Agency. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to this JANAAC Accredicast Quality Management Series.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, Ms. Jones.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. I want to start off this discussion, and perhaps Ms. Jones, as you have commented first, we could begin with you. Climate change. Let us contextualize the discussion a little bit for our listeners. What do we mean when we speak about a changing climate, and what impacts does it have on our globe, on our societies?
Is that for me?
That is for you, Ms. Jones.
Okay. Okay. Climate change, we've been talking so much about climate change. We're talking about changing weather patterns, which is what I think the average person will understand. Changing temperatures, changing rainfall patterns, and that's extremely important. The temperatures themselves affect sea levels, affect ocean currents, and ultimately affect the entire climate circulation, which I'm just trying to sort of simplify, if you will, which lead to what we have come to recognize, particularly in the Caribbean, extreme weather events. And these extreme weather events are not just storms and hurricanes, but floods, because the nature of changing temperature and weather patterns gives us short duration rainfall. So we get flood conditions, and we're not able very often to handle that. So you get flooded cities, you get flooded communities outside of hurricanes. And in fact, the global warming is also affecting our marine life, affecting our ocean life. So it's affecting land, it's affecting water, but really higher temperatures, changing rainfall patterns have tremendous implications for life as we know it, all aspects of life.
And perhaps, Christopher Corbin, you could comment from the UNEP's Cartagena Convention Secretariat. You could tell us there are several aspects of our globe that is affected by these changing patterns. From a socioeconomic development standpoint, there's also human health and planetary health. From those perspectives, what are the most fundamental challenges that accrue for the world as a result of these changing climate patterns? Let's start off from a socioeconomic standpoint. Who suffers, and how does this relate to climate change?
Thank you so much, Sharon, and again, welcome to all listeners and viewers. I'll take one small step back, Sharon, and just to indicate really how critical this issue of climate change is, and UNEP at the global level have reformulated their medium-term strategy to support all governments around three main areas: climate change, pollution, and biodiversity, and recognizing just how critical climate change is impacting on broad development issues. So when we talk particularly about socioeconomic development, we are seeing the direct impact on our major revenue earning sectors. As has been mentioned, small island developing states in particular have the majority of their infrastructure along coastlines, whether it be airports, whether it be tourism, tourist establishments, whether it be our own coastal communities. And you have the impacts of sea level rise, the impacts of flooding, creating major challenges to these very vulnerable coastal communities. In some countries, what we have seen are significant socioeconomic impacts associated with forced migration. People who are no longer able to live along riverbanks that are subject to the impacts of climate change in coastal areas, particularly what happens after these man-made and induced natural hazards and disasters. And this is really causing a significant impact on the development opportunities. I also wanted to highlight the investment opportunity loss that we are having as a result of climate change. And it comes back to the point made earlier by the Honorable Minister and by one of our speakers about that aspect of risk. And we are seen now as small island developing states as a high risk environment because of the impacts of climate change. And that means a cost for insurance. It means a cost for general, the population in terms of what they need to invest with, whether it be manufacturing, and how that ripple effect impacts on our economic, on our opportunities to generate livelihoods, to generate jobs. So it's a significant impact. So I'll pause there. I know we have also the issues on human health and planetary health and biodiversity, but there is no doubt that it is a major concern that we do need to look at as a region and as individual small island developing states.
Absolutely. And we're going to be speaking a lot about the region as a whole, as we do not just want to focus on one locale. We don't want to just focus on Jamaica because, climate change concerns affects the globe. And even though we're a part of a pool that is emitting perhaps less than the global community, it still affects us. So we too within the region have a role to play. But I want to hear from Mr. McKenzie, Anthony McKenzie, who is the director or one of the directors at NEPA, the National Environment and Planning Agency. I wonder, Mr. McKenzie, what is the national posture today in Jamaica? We're going to expand it to the region, but what is the national posture today concerning the approach to climate change and mitigation concerns? Have we been doing enough? What are we not doing?
Thank you very much. I think from the point of view of the government has been making significant strides in terms of responding both with respect to our mitigation efforts and our adaptation response strategies. The government has defined a climate change strategy. And as you referred earlier, Jamaica has developed its national determined contribution. So it has put in place, in the first instance, the policy framework to address and respond to the climate impact and its attempt at supporting mitigation measures, and as well as meeting the obligations as defined in the Paris Accord and Paris commitments. There are some critical issues that we face as a small island country, and particularly where we are located. There are challenges, and therefore this has to be, the question of climate change and climate change response has to be at the forefront of government policy. And in that regard, I think the government is making strides. Just to add, before I close, the institutional framework, there is a climate change division that has a particular focus on that effort. And I think going forward, we'll be seeing some positive results in that regard.
Well, we speak about challenge, but I want for us to, for the purpose of our listeners, be very clear on what these specific challenges are. The Prime Minister has articulated the nationally determined contributions in that we want to ensure that by 2030, we are emitting up to less, well, it's 60% less than what we are currently emitting by way of greenhouse gas emissions. And for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about now those toxic fumes that comes from ships, that comes from, or vehicles, that contributes to pollution of our air quality. And that too has a significant impact on the global climate change effort. Reducing the greenhouse gas emissions is important. But why have we been able to do enough that is required to get us to that 60% reduction by 2030? Are we on track? Mr. McKenzie, do you believe?
Right, so some new targets have been established previously. Back in 2009, there was a 30% commitment to transition from heavy fuel oil and fossil fuels to alternative forms of energy. And as you indicated, the Prime Minister has upped that commitment.
From 25, because initially it was 25%, right. So we're now 60.
So we have to make some bold leaps towards that. We have been moving towards transitioning. You've seen where, well, in terms of electricity generation, that a lot of our energy now is moving away from heavy fuels to LNG. We've been bolstering our alternatives. We've established three significant three significant alternative energy supply systems: wind and solar in Jamaica. I think some of the larger ones in the Caribbean. And so steps are being taken. But I think at this point, in order to meet that commitment, we have to double our efforts.
Well, Mr. Franco Mito, who is the former Director General of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association. I mean, sir, you would have been dealing with people from all over the globe within that particular industry. I wonder, do you believe that there are certain cultural realities that perhaps we've been ignoring concerning this approach to climate change? We're not talking now necessarily at the policy level, but human beings, individuals, everyday life, how we treat our natural resources. To what extent have you seen that those cultural realities impacting our approach to climate change?
Thank you, Darren, and thank you for inviting our participation. I wasn't aware it was World Accreditation Day until I got your first invitation, and then yesterday was World Ocean Day, and I took a dip in the ocean. And the day before,
did you do it in Jamaica? You should have been here, man. It's one of the best places for beaches, you know.
And the day before that was National Chocolate Ice Cream Day. So,
wow.
It's only appropriate that I'm partaking with you all today. So thank you.
Yeah.
The cultural shift has to occur, and it is occurring, but it's a race, I think, and it's at all policy levels and with our institutions, with our companies, with our people, and until things actually impact people directly, it's difficult to get their attention. And we've seen some of that occurring over the years with businesses where they've gotten, 20 years ago, they were not as prepared for hurricanes and weather systems and so on, and have recognized that was a direct economic impact and they better up their game. So then they started responding, and our ability to weather storms has improved significantly because of readiness and response and all the various measures that have been put in place over the years. But until there's a direct impact on people, it's hard for them to grasp what they're doing. Now, that being said, what we're seeing right now from a business point of view, from a travel point of view, is a shift in the traveler's mindset. So the traveler is becoming increasingly more conscious their environmental footprint, of their impact on where they go, and they also want to experience things differently than they have in the past. So that shift, I think, is going to begin to drive even greater behavioral changes by the businesses as well. But until there's a real direct impact, people tend to not give it the attention it needs, and I think that's our dilemma right now as societies.
And there is also a view, Frank, that the cost for going renewable, the renewable energy sources, solar, wind, hydroelectricity, and so on, is expensive. So perhaps in commenting on this, I think maybe Christopher, you can respond to this one. Has the region been doing enough, or are they prepared? Do they have the wherewithal to do enough to go green, given the costs associated? Or is it a matter of political will that will assist us to go even further to where we need to be insofar as a transition is concerned?
Yeah, thanks so much, Darren. And as making a few notes, because those last couple of interventions, I think, really speak to some of the challenges and the opportunities. I think we are at a time now, if you ask any minister with some portfolio responsibility as to whether or not climate change is real or not, for us, particularly in our region, there is no doubt. It's as some of my colleagues say, it's an existential issue. It affects everybody. It affects private sector, local communities. We see it and we feel it on a daily basis. Are we doing enough yet to respond in the most effective way? Probably not. I think we are moving in the right direction, but as Mr. McKenzie said, I think there are certain things that need to be accelerated. So I wanted to touch upon targets. That's the first step, and I think it's an excellent one. We need to be aspirational. We need to think, what can we achieve as a region? What can we achieve as a country in terms of reorienting our society towards that? Then we have to create the conditions that allow that orientation to take place. So this is part of my first response. Do we have the policies? Do we have the legislation? Do we have the regulations? Do we have the incentives or disincentives that can further stimulate that change to going more renewable, that change, for example, to use more nature-based solutions that are also seen as a climate change adaptation measure? Are we making it amenable for the private sector and businesses to invest in climate adaptation type solutions in terms of technology? And that's where the partnerships are key. That's where we need to promote more South-South cooperation within the region, within the Caribbean, but also with our colleagues in the Pacific and elsewhere. And that's where UNEP and the UN agencies and these global platforms that exist really allow us to bring some of our issues to the global table, because our issues are different. You heard from the opening speakers about being the most tourism dependent region, and also the region that's likely to be at highest risk, primarily because of climate change. So that means we can't afford to wait, we can't afford to make mistakes, but we do need to identify concrete, tangible measures where we can make that transition, while at the same time ensuring that we are not marginalizing local communities or persons who are really feeling the greatest impact of climate change.
There are organizations, and we know this, that have been doing well. They are very conscious about the importance of going green, the importance of paying attention to the climate change concerns, and they have fully adopted those practices in their company. And that's one of the reasons we also have Ms. Eleanor Jones with us, because she, through her Quality and Environmental Health Lab, have received JANAAC accreditation. And we want for her to just talk to us a little bit about what that accreditation for her lab means on the question of climate change impacts and mitigation. to just contextualize that bit of the discussion for us, Ms. Jones. Mrs. Jones.
Okay, thank you very much, Darren. It really is a pleasure to be listening to the conversations, and Chris, I think you hit the nail on the head. As always, the enabling conditions are so important for us. We have the targets, but the enabling conditions are really where we need to go. And one of the key aspects of that enabling circumstance is a matter of sensitization, and not just simply saying climate change is here, you're going to have difficulties, but what's in it for me? What does it mean for me as an individual? What does it mean for me as a business, as a community? Because until we can get that hook to get persons to understand that it's not an esoteric idea, it's not something that is far removed, we're going to be slow off the mark. We are trending in the right direction, I think, but there is so much more that needs to be done. And this is why I want to take this opportunity to really congratulate JANAAC for this initiative. I'm very, very proud of Mrs. Shirley and the leadership, the fact that you are supporting the Sustainable Development Goals following the World Accreditation theme. It's wonderful. And here at Environmental Solutions, we are proud also because we were the first private sector laboratory to be accredited to the ISO, accredited by JANAAC to the ISO 17025 standard in 2011. And between then and now, we have doubled our scope, and we have perhaps the largest number of accredited parameters of any laboratory. So we're very proud of that, and we're proud because following JANAAC's accreditation, you really are talking about conformity, talking about standards, talking about excellence, which is what Environmental Solutions is committed to. And working with the accreditation program, it forces us to really pay attention to standards, to best practice, to working with international organizations. So the laboratory we have microbiology, we work with chemistry, we do a lot of air quality sampling, water quality sampling, soil, so land, air, even noise, environmental health is an important part of what we do. And working with communities, working with businesses in particular, and working with the government, we have been able to assist them to meet their own targets. Very large manufacturing enterprises who are on the global scale with respect to exports, we have been able to work along with them to help them to meet these standards. And of course, NEPA has their standards, and we help the companies to meet the national standards, to meet the international standards. And this is what JANAAC is promoting. And so for you to be looking at climate change, which is a major hurdle for us in the region, and Mr. Darren or Chris, I think, we have heard about the tourism sector. Frank, the tourism sector is particularly at risk. And while we're talking climate change and we're talking environmental health, we also we can't forget about the pandemic, which has really leveled us, brought us to a different place, and recognizing that air quality, respiratory air, the respiratory impact of the COVID pandemic is real, and we live in a multi-hazard environment. And so while we're talking climate change, we have to look at the volcanic eruption, which we have just experienced in St. Vincent. It's a regional thing. That dust went to Barbados. Barbados was closed. And what does it all mean? So we at Environmental Solutions, or Quality and Environmental Health Laboratory, we have been working through the region. We work not only in Jamaica, but we've worked in other territories with wastewater monitoring and testing, coastal water quality testing, and quite the gamut. So we thank you for this opportunity. We are honored to be able to share in this. I would call it a trailblazing and groundbreaking, what you call it, Accredicast. Congratulations to the vision and to the work that you have been doing, because I know, again, as I said, I'm very proud of Mrs. Shirley's leadership and the quality management, and certainly environmental solutions will continue to press forward with its commitment to harmonizing development and the environment for sustainable prosperity, which is what we speak about in our Vision 2030 and our plan. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And that's what our lab is about, and that's what accreditation is about. Measurement, standards, and quality.
I like that. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And I think that that sits at the heart of what we speak of when we speak about accreditation. And certainly to the extent that we are able to put forward a quality product, put forward a quality intervention as it regards climate change and adaptation, then there will be something for us to measure, because clearly from that we will know that we are trending down as it concerns our global emissions, and other things will have a better hold on. We will have a better understanding of concerning this climate change move. Well, there are countries, New Zealand, for example, that have now gone into carbon pricing. So there is a price for pollution. You have to pay if you're a pollutant, okay? In Jamaica, we have gone with the move of ensuring that we are removing plastics from being imported. Certainly because we realize that these plastics have a dangerous effect on our natural environment. What are some of the other things that we can do as global citizens, as regional citizens, not just at the community level, but at the policy level as well, to ensure that we improve as it concerns or move to limit these effects, these harmful effects of climate change? Christopher Corbin, could you comment on that for me? And then I'll go to Mr. McKenzie from NEPA. Practical solution. What do we need to be doing today?
Answer the call for me, Mr.
Thanks, Darren. And Mrs. Jones touched on several things, and I just want to maybe encapsulate them in a couple of key things. We need that continuous and that sustained advocacy and awareness in language that everyone understands. I mean, you're talking about greenhouse gases and global warming and sea level rise. What does that actually mean in the context of impacts on individuals, impacts on communities, impacts on your health, impacts on your ability to get a job or to keep a job? So that aspect of advocacy and awareness is key. I don't think, Darren, when you reached out to me, you would have known that in a very long previous life, I actually worked in a lab doing recreational water quality monitoring. So, Mrs. Jones, it is really heartening to hear. And my second point then is really about the data and information that we need to generate and transform in a way that is significantly influencing our policy agenda. And I think Jamaica, in this case, has much to be proud of. I think it's a bit leading when I look at some of the other Caribbean countries in how the data that is generated at the national level, how that's being used to inform new policies and new legislation. But it needs that transformation process. We need to take that climate-related data and transform it into some form of knowledge management product that feeds into a decision-making process. So again, a very practical approach that needs a multidisciplinary group of social scientists, environmental scientists. We need to understand what drives behavior in our region. We say, we are, Jamaicans behave this way. St. Lucians, I'm a St. Lucian, behave this way. But what's the underlying driving cause of how we function in a society and as a culture, so that when we make the interventions like the single-use plastic bans, are we making the interventions in a way that will that people will be able to accept and understand and see the value of. And the final practical point I would like to suggest, Darren, relates to the technological solutions and the best practices. I've seen so much evidence here at a local community level of climate change adaptation at work. Are these being promoted? Are these being showcased as models that should be replicated in other communities across the island, across the region? No. And I think we have a lot of talent and skills in the region to take technology or approaches from overseas and adapt it and make it relevant to our circumstances. So again, the call for our researchers and our universities and our technical experts to put them good minds to respond to some of the challenges that we have in the climate change arena. Thanks.
I'm going to come to you, Mr. Comito, in a short while, because I want to hear from you about how it is that the tourism industry, I mean, we've seen the anecdotal evidence of how it is that climate change has affected that industry, but we want to speak a little bit more closely to give a better overview of how exactly this industry, this very important industry, has been affected. But I'm going to be going right back now to Mr. McKenzie. Practical solutions. What do we need to be doing today, not just in Jamaica, but the region and the world, at a community level and perhaps even at a policy level, to ensure that we're handling this climate change matter?
Right. So there are a wide range of issues and, I suppose, approaches. The policy level, and I mean, I speak particularly with respect to the work of NEPA. And we referred earlier to the question of the private sector. And now we have a system, I mean, it's a regulatory system, a permit and licensing system. Now, an interesting aspect of that speaks to the matter of waste generation and the management of wastewater included. And you referred earlier to the cases in New Zealand. Now, in the case of Jamaica, there are incentives to support cleaner discharges of wastewater. In fact, there's a sort of polluter principle that's tied into our discharge framework. So if you discharge effluent that is of a lower quality, you pay more within, of course, the standards. And I mean, we've been discussing all along about standards and accreditation. So we have established standards for discharges. Now there are incentives because you pay less when you discharge higher quality effluent. Secondly, in terms of the beneficial use, we have challenges relating to our water supply in the context of climate change going forward. The scenarios are that we have less water. At a policy level, we're now supporting wastewater usage. And of course, that's a beneficial use, and that's an incentive that's again tied into our regulatory framework. It needs to be expounded from a policy level, but certainly the amount of wastewater that we generate that can be transferred into treated to particular standards and applied for beneficial use. So I'm just quickly making that point. I mean, I think the focus of the agency is on the realization that a healthy ecosystem or healthy ecosystems are inextricably linked to the resilience of the country in the face of climate change.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that intervention, Mr. McKenzie. Mr. Comito, tourism. You know, talk to us about that very important industry. You know, we are here in Jamaica, and you know, there are many persons, I'm sure not just here, but all over the world who are, you know, there's a lot happening, certainly since COVID-19, and the industry has been so hard hit. But it's not just with regards to COVID-19, is it? I mean, there are a lot of persons who want to go to hotels where they know that there are green practices at play. But beyond that, talk to us about how it is that the industry has been affected by these climate change challenges that we know of all too well.
Well, it's had a huge impact. I mean, just look at the last 5 years. We've had, and then arguably some of these, if not all of them, could be related to climate change. The sargassum seaweed issue, it's mushroomed in a huge way throughout the region, and we're going to have another tough summer of it as well, with all indications right now. There's a lot of indications that that's related to poor environmental practices and environmental changes that are going on. That has had a tremendous impact on travel, and will continue to, and the cost of operations to clean up both by governments and by industry. So that's one. One could argue that some of the new diseases that we've seen emerge are coming about because of climate change and temperature changes and so on. Zika, dengue fever outbreaks. One could even say COVID, but I don't feel scientifically grounded in that. But there's a case to be made for those kinds of discussions, those kinds of points as well. The whole issue of not only diseases, but certainly, and not just, we tend to think of hurricanes when we think of disasters, but we've had tropical storms and other kinds of flood and drought situations that have caused just the same level of damage to our economies and societies and governments and businesses and individuals over the past 10 years. It's accelerated. So what I wanted to do, though, is just highlight a process that we've gone through at the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association with several projects in recent years around this subject area. One being years ago through the Caribbean Alliance for Sustainable Tourism, which we established in the early 1990s. We basically started training on environmental management systems and what hotels needed to do to put in place to look at their entire environment in a macro way, much like the UN sustainability goals do. They don't just look at it from an ecological way, but in a broad context. And what kinds of systems do we have to have in place as a company to be effective? So we trained several hundred businesses in EMS practices back in the late 1990s through the early 2000s. And that helped to create this awareness and so on. But the other project, and all of them had a common kind of an approach, which I think is illustrative for us going forward as well. But the other area that we had focus on was on energy efficiency. With the help of an IDB grant, we and Caribbean Tourism Organization and CHTA conducted a very detailed audit of the energy efficiency of primarily of hotels throughout the region. Several hundred hotels went through it, and from that they were given a lot of training and advice on what they could do to minimize their economic impact on energy use. And then the third project area that we got involved in, I think has some relevance from an approach point of view, was with the Caribbean Public Health Agency and ourselves, and Caribbean Tourism Organization, our public sector counterpart. And that was on health safety protocols. So with each of these, we had to have a foundation of standards in order to know what our benchmarks were. So we didn't have a lot of these standards ourselves, so we went internationally. What are the standards in each of those areas that I just mentioned? And from that became the basis for conducting assessments. How are we as companies measuring up against those standards? And recognize that a lot of companies were not measuring up and losing substantially as a result of it. And that self-evaluation, often without outside support as well, helped to understand where they were at and where they benchmarked against global standards as well. From that became the basis for understanding, okay, you have this knowledge, what do you need to do? What type of training, awareness building, and other kinds of things do you need to do to improve your operations and be more environmentally and energy-wise sound and health safety-wise sound. And then with that helped also, this whole process helped to inform something that Chris was talking to earlier, and that's policy. what we've learned through these exercises, okay, there are some policy shifts that need to occur because we've become aware of it even more so, and it's backed by intelligence and data and information and so on, and that becomes the basis for advancing policy. Right now, in the area of health safety, we've been advancing policy for almost a year from what we've learned from this exercise we've gone through. But all of this is all based, then what do you do with all of that? You share it, it's best practices, you share it with the world and so on, so others can elevate, understand, learn from your lessons, your best practices as well as your worst practices. There's often more to be learned from worst practices. But that whole process that I've talked about with these three exercises had to occur in a collaborative environment. And that's what I really want to emphasize right here at this point. Collaboration is key. Public, private sector, the government, the various institutions and entities like JANAAC and so on, in a collaborative way. That's how we become more effective in what we're doing.
And would you agree that, I mean, global investors, certainly for your industry, would be more interested in those eco-friendly practices as manifest in hotels and so on?
Yeah, and I think they're following the customer. The customer is shifting. So as behaviors change with the public and the customer, that's why it's so important to constantly educate and make aware. It'll be demand driven. It won't be driven by, it'll be demand and ultimately profit driven, because the money is tied to what the customer is looking for, what the customer expects. What kind of corporate citizen, what kind of country are you in terms of how you approach these kinds of things that are so important increasingly to people?
There's an ongoing discussion about financing for small island developing states, SIDS, because the international community in many instances have been focusing on per capita income as a determinant in their decision as to whether certain kinds of funds would be released for climate change matters. There is a call now for us to focus a lot more on the vulnerability of countries as a determinant rather than their per capita income. What have you seen, Mr. Comito? Well, I think a better person, given the fact that, we're focusing now on, I know a lot of work has been done through the UNEP, insofar as this matter is concerned. So can you talk to us a little bit, Christopher Corbin, on the question of financing? How is financing organized for persons and for organizations and for countries insofar as climate change is concerned? Is it enough for it to be on the basis of per capita income, or do we need to look a little bit closer on their vulnerabilities? Vulnerabilities being where they are located, their geography, being closer to coastal areas, among other things.
Thanks, Darren. And before I had gray hair and maybe a little bit more hair on my head, this is something that small island developing states have been advocating for years, decades almost, that our societies were small, we were highly vulnerable, GDPs were not an accurate measure of our vulnerability. With one hurricane, you had 100, 200, 300% of your economy being devastated and years to recover. And we saw it in Grenada, we saw it in many of the other small islands. The debate is ongoing. I think the UN system have recognized the SIDS as a unique community. And I think it took collaboration, it took a lot of lobbying in New York and the diplomatic circles across the globe. It took the AOSIS, which is the different grouping of small island developing states, coming together and recognizing that every single island had a voice and had a strong voice at this international arena, and actively lobbied for the recognition that we were unique, that we were vulnerable, and that we needed a special investment of financing. So we've had new financing windows being opened, the Green Climate Fund as one example, where governments and small islands can now develop projects. It's difficult. When you look at the project preparation process and you look at what has to be done it's like you need capacity building just to develop those projects to get the money to address your financing issue. And that's another debate. But I would say that yes, the financing is there, but how can we as a region collectively build a capacity now to access that financing? And I just end by saying what we are also seeing, which is a bit of a challenge for us from some donors, is that they're expecting some almost extraordinary, unrealistic levels of co-financing to make the project viable. And we also have very small economies, and some cases not able to provide that co-financing. And again, it speaks to the importance of the partnership. Can we have meaningful joint partnerships with private sector, with umbrella regional organizations? Can we target into the philanthropy and those foundations that also have resources that are being made available? So I think we also have to broaden our thinking and look at non-traditional sources of financing and be very clear in terms of what we want to achieve. I've seen that in some of the proposals that they are still talking about the superficial and they're not really getting down to the impact at the national and in some cases local community level. Over.
Jamila Geddes is my sister, and on Facebook she said, "Happy you touched on sargassum. This can be changed from a problem to a product. Why haven't we seen more businesses take this on?" What is your response to that? Talk to us about sargassum. What is it, sargassum, and how can it become a product rather than a problem?
The sargassum influx, maybe I should put a little plug for a webinar that we're having tomorrow that we've organized with our colleagues from across the Atlantic in West Africa. And for persons who are not aware, West Africa is facing the same challenges with sargassum that we are in the Caribbean, and major economic challenges, impacts on tourism, health. Sargassum was always there as a marine organism, but what we are finding is the large influxes of sargassum that we are now having. There is still a bit of debate as to whether or not it's actually associated with climate change and the different oceanographic patterns originating in the Sargasso Sea, but now impacting all of the islands within the Caribbean. And there's also a discussion to the extent that pollution is actually exacerbating the problem of sargassum, and particularly pollution from nutrients. Is it an opportunity? Yes. We've heard of all sorts of ways in which there are responses in terms of how can we use sargassum as a fertilizer for biogas. But again, and I'm looking at Mrs. Jones, the importance of the standards and the criteria for sargassum. I've heard that depending on where the sargassum passes through, you could have heavy metal content, which would then influence its use as a fertilizer. So it's not as simple, let's take all the sargassum and use it in agriculture. But again, the importance of standards and criteria and monitoring, but the solutions are out there, yes.
You know, I came across recently some information concerning how human consumerist patterns, or consumption patterns rather, influence climate change concerns. Certainly to the extent, and I'm sure persons who are vegetarians will be happy to hear this, because you know, meat consumption, there is a call for us to reduce our meat intake, and I bet nobody can tell me what the reason is. I'm sure perhaps some of us can, but perhaps others can't. I was shocked because the thinking is that if it is that more of us eat less meat, it means that our farmers would not need as much space to clear. So our trees would remain intact because our farmers otherwise would need to clear the space in order to have their animals, their herds, their cows, and so on. And so there would be less deforestation. Is that the sum total of it when we speak about consumption patterns affecting climate change, Mr. Corbett? Or is there more?
I think there's methane in there too somewhere.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
I was going to touch on that.
there.
Methane.
Yes,
Right.
Mr. Miller, you are asking some of the hard questions, and yes, I've seen, like you, the scientific studies that indicate what types of agriculture, for example, use the most land, are most intensive, use the most water, and I would say that's where we need to really look at the multidisciplinary approach in terms of scientists. Is there need to improve our consumption patterns and be more sustainable? Yes. I think we can all agree on that. But how, by changing radically from one to another, how does that impact on other communities and societies and the economic development agenda? And I think that's where you really need to bring together your environmental scientists, your social scientists, your engineers, to actually come up with solutions that are fit for purpose. I am a little, and I may not be speaking fully on behalf of UNEP now, but I'm a little sensitive to the one-size-fits-all solution.
That's right.
I think we have to see within our context, first of all, as a country and as a region, what's the best use of our resources for the betterment of our people, jobs, and livelihoods. It will involve trade-offs. It will. We're going to have to balance and decide, do we go this way or that way? But it has to be with that longer vision of improvement of the quality of life of our people, notwithstanding the science.
Mrs. Jones, I see you agreeing.
I am most certainly agreeing, Mr. Miller. One of the terms we have used earlier, and perhaps more than once, is practical solutions. And Chris has indicated it's not a one size fits all. And yes, there are some of these studies, but at the end of the day, we have to be people-centered. We have to understand, as you referred earlier, to cultural practices and so on. You don't just simply say, okay, this piece of research has shown me this, let's go forward and implement it. It just doesn't work that way. And so we're talking about very complex issues, and the complexity is exacerbated by the fact that we're talking about human beings and we're talking about human behavior. And I don't think there's anything more complex than human behavior and human beings. And so, yes, we have to continue with our research. We have to look at how we implement. And I was very pleased to hear Mr. Comita speak about the process within the tourism industry, because there's a lot to be learned, and there are other sectors that are implementing some of these. But environmental management systems, very critical, because you're looking at putting together many pieces of a puzzle. You're looking at health, you know, so the CARFA, you're looking at energy, we're looking at all of these things, and agriculture and the small farmer. How do you tell him to change? How do you tell the meat eater that you can't eat hamburgers anymore? And if you remember the politics of some of the election campaigning in certain other parts of the world, not so far from here, where they were saying, oh, these climate change people are saying you can't eat hamburgers anymore. And so this is the kind of extreme talking, shall we say, that we want to stay away from. We want the practical solutions that are people-centered, that are underpinned by the science, but the application of the science is what is important.
We're going to be getting some questions in a short while from our viewers on this platform and also across social media. But before we get to that, and in the meantime, think about your questions. I want to see your raise hand features coming up, because I'm going to be coming to you with your questions, so think about them. In the meantime, I want to turn a little bit to urban planning and how it is that, you know, we look in Jamaica, we look across the world, and we see a lot happening by way of buildings. They're going up all over. And, you know, urban planning has a role to play in mitigating against these climate change concerns. And I think the best person to give a response to that, though I know we all have perspectives, is Mr. McKenzie from NEPA. Urban planning, sir. You know, what implications does it have for climate change? What should we be doing to ensure that even though we're building, even though we're industrializing, we're paying attention to these important climate change imperatives? Mr. McKenzie? All right, we don't seem to have
right,
Mr. Okay.
Yeah, so urban planning is critically also about adaptation and also mitigation as well. As in the broadest context, from a policy approach point of view, I think the government has looked at a settlement strategy, right, aimed at ensuring that where we live, or the focus, the urban nodes or urban centers or growth centers, as they call them, are cited appropriately, having consideration for the multiple hazards that potentially exist. And therefore, the focus has been on trying to ensure that subdivisions, housing developments of higher density are focused in these areas. So that's in a broad sense, so that we take away the population from vulnerable areas and perhaps also ecologically sensitive areas. So living in areas that are designated for urban settlements in the first instance. Now,
and what are we talking about, these designated areas? What specific areas are we speaking about when we speak about the designated or preferred areas for living?
All right, so as I said, in the settlement, so Kingston is an urban area. It's an area for residents and industry and recreation and so on, right? And of course, there are outside of those areas, those are perhaps would be considered as more vulnerable in some instances. So if they're talking about up in, just outside of Kingston, up in the Hope River watersheds or the Yalas Mountain watersheds, those areas people farm, but ideally we want people to live in areas that are less vulnerable, right?
But that area supplies some 42% of Kingston's potable drinking water, the Yalas and Hope River Valley.
Exactly. So it's all about ensuring that the ecosystem there are left and enhanced to support the resilience of the area. Now, we've also been working on development orders. Perhaps you'd have heard now that the country is now covered by development orders. Now, these development orders provide standards and guidelines for land use around the country. Again, recognizing the land capabilities and vulnerabilities of the various areas. Now, in terms of the siting of buildings and the actual buildings, and we've heard the discussion about climate smart buildings, and we've seen the ever increasing developments within the Kingston area in recent times, and the discussions about high density and high-rise buildings. That, I think, is a direct and conscious policy move by the government to support developments where we have the necessary infrastructure, and as well there is less vulnerability associated with impacts of climate change. So I think the policy position going forward is that from a planning perspective, that our resilience will be supported by climate smart approaches.
On the point of planning, you were in the press, NEPA certainly, in 2020, just last year, on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic, where it was said that because of the restriction in movement, there have been an indication that many of the concerns surrounding emissions were now lessened. That was in 2020 at the outset. Has that continued to this day? These movements being restricted, the lessening of carbon emissions and so on. What have your findings unearthed concerning COVID-19, since COVID-19, how it has affected the climate change response?
Yeah, well, we saw some positive trends in our data collection. I should quickly refer to a point that Elena raised earlier, and to indicate that as a government agency, we collect water quality data from over 200 marine and riverine sites. So we collect a lot of data, right? And it's important that from a standard point of view, that the processes that account for the assessment, the monitoring, assessment, and preparation and documentation of this information is accredited. And again, like ESL, we have moved to ensure that our processes are at a very high standard. We have ISO accreditation, ISO 40,000 certification for some of our processes so far, and we're working with JANAAC. JANAAC has been engaged with us for some time, working to ensure that the standards are maintained in terms of our processes. Now, yes, we collect a wide range of data, and with the COVID lockdown, and there was a complete lockdown a couple of weeks last year in April, when we observed significant improvement in air quality in some of our urban areas. So at Kingston, Spanish Town Road, in Montego Bay, in Mandeville to a lesser extent, we saw a reduction in PM 2.5 particulate matter of upwards of 20% reduction during that 3 to 4 week period. There's also some improvement. We can't say categorically that is the case, but there's also we saw some positive changes in water quality along the North Coast. I don't want to say that it's attributed to the COVID lockdown, but certainly in terms of air quality, and we saw that data in our monitors, and it's linked directly to vehicular traffic. So that was a positive, certainly. Right.
Are there some opportunities now, Mr. Comito, for the tourism industry to really see, coming out of COVID-19, to really gather some important lessons as it concerns their preparation for, we hope, a reopening of the world, as it were? Are there some important lessons that we can glean for the tourism industry at this time?
Well, I think the core one is the whole focus on standards. We're at a different, in order to restore consumer traveler confidence and employee confidence, it was really important that we focus on all of those standards that are necessary to provide a healthier, safer kind of environment. So working with our partners in the Caribbean Public Health Agency and with industry and governments throughout the region, it took us about 2.5 months. Last April and May, we put in place quite extensive standards and guidelines for health safety and checklists as well. And then not only did that, but then embarked on extensive training. So the whole idea of getting a massive amount of industry involved in understanding these are the standards, these are the protocols that we need to adhere to. I think psychologically that's been a major shift for our industry. We've always had lots of training and standards and so on, different ways and apprenticeship programs and so on. But we've seen it at a whole different level with COVID, and I'm hoping that that'll parlay into other kinds of activities. We're not quite at an accreditation level, but those businesses that go through all of the training that we provide through the Caribbean Public Health Agency and ourselves, all the training, and then are part of an online monitoring system on health safety matters and meet some reporting requirements for that periodically, that they're eligible for a health safety stamp. It's not an accreditation kind of thing, but it's a stamp. And I think it's moving in that direction. We're also eligible now, anybody that goes through the training, the World Travel and Tourism Council has enabled us to be able to issue their stamp through the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association to businesses that have gone through the training as well. So we've been able to effectively, I think, elevate this sense of understanding of standards. And then how do we reward that? How do we recognize and reward that? I think that's where we've got to take it to the next level, and that's our challenge going forward with a major lesson learned out of COVID.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I want some closing comments from each of you. I mean, we're here today because it's not just because we are celebrating World Accreditation Day, we're finding something to discuss. This is an important matter. This is a matter that affects not just present generations, but can likely affect future generations if we do not make the right moves. That is what we speak about when we speak about sustainable development. The extent to which we are putting in place the measures to ensure the survivability of humankind, plant life, the sentient world. And so I want for us to start with these closing comments. 15 seconds, give me a sense of what it is that you believe we should now be doing, the imperatives that we should now be paying attention to for the development of our society from a climate change mitigation and adaptation perspective. Let me start with Mrs. Eleanor Jones. We started with you earlier. Over to you.
15 seconds. Advocacy, sensitization, training, this has been emphasized, and standards and measurement and recognition and reward for standards. So we talk about nature-based solutions, I think so important. So much has been placed on the table here, but we need to say, what is it, where are we going, and really walk the talk. Because we do a lot of talking, as we all know, but we don't quite walk the talk as much as we need to. And while we're talking about urban planning, we need to be thinking, we're not creating heat islands. What about transportation? What about, greening of green space, human, all of this. So we need, it's complex, multi-sector, multidisciplinary, but at the end of the day, we want to, what's in it for me? Why is it important for me to do this for my business bottom line, for the health, my personal health, the health of my family, my children going forward? And how do we do it? What are the mechanisms? How do we train? And how do we measure? And how do we reward? So the business of standards is extremely important. Quality and standards.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Jones. Mr. McKenzie, closing comments.
Thank you very much. So last Friday was also recognized as World Environment Day. Ecosystem restoration as a key feature. I mean, there's been the discussion in the media in recent times, especially about some approvals relating to some developments. And the question is that, how do we make decisions that balance the development agenda as against the need to conserve and protect our resources? It's important that we have data and information to support those decisions and the decision-making processes. And while we seek to get as much information and data as practically possible, it's important that they are aligned with standards and are credible. And therefore, the work of JANAAC in that regard is important and certainly supported by agencies such as NEPA. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. McKenzie. Mr. Comito, over to you, sir. Closing comments?
Yeah, I think I think Anthony and Eleanor covered a lot of it. Hello, you hear me?
We can. We
Okay.
can. Right ahead.
And Eleanor covered a lot of the key points: training, resources, standards, advocacy. But I want to go back to emphasizing this point of collaboration and partnerships. I think it's absolutely essential. I'm inspired by what happened at the Paris conference. What was that, 6-7 years ago now, 6-7 years ago, when 20-odd very little countries in the Caribbean collectively got together and said, we can influence the global agenda, because they all had a vote, small as they could be, and they influenced it. But that was a power of collaboration. We chimed in there as an association as well and added our support, but that was small compared to 20-odd countries getting to that global table of 100 and whatever it was, I think 160 or so countries, basically being able to collaboratively, collectively exert their influence. And I think we underestimate what we can do with the collaborative often. So that's my closing comment. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Comito. As we turn to Mr. Corbin, Christopher Corbin from UNEP.
Thanks. When our own executive director of UNEP started the mantra about this is an opportunity to build back better with nature, I think COVID-19 has given us an opportunity to pause and reflect some of what Mr. McKenzie said in terms of the improvements that have been seen in the environment, whether it be coastal water quality or air pollution. They have seen similar improvements across many other countries. So it means we can make a change. So my closing remarks, building on everything everyone has already said, is that now we need to be bold in the types of decisions that we take. We need to break from what's comfortable and what we're used to what's sustainable, what's cross-cutting, what breaks down the silos that we still have among the sectors, so that it's when we talk sustainable development now and we talk Vision 2030 and we say, I don't want to use my poor Jamaican interpretation, but we lickle, but we talawa,
Yes.
that it means something. It means something. And I believe that we're on the right track, but government has to lead, private sector has to lead, and it has to resonate with every single person, every single person at the community level. So that would be it for me. Thanks, Al.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all our panelists. We have a question from Roxine Green. We're going to invite her to join the stream and to go right ahead, introduce yourself and direct your question to the panelists. Our panelists, over to you, Roxine Green. There's no audio. Okay. Okay, she has no audio, but Roxine, perhaps if I could just get her question, I'll be able to just ask the question for you. I'm not seeing her question. So what we will do, we're going to get to that in a little while, because we want to ensure that we give our participants an opportunity to join in on the discussion. As we await the question, because we'll be sharing it with you. We want to also emphasize that we today, in celebrating World Accreditation Day, as we culminate all the activities that we have been undertaking, we want to emphasize the persons, organizations, what we call conformity assessment bodies, the importance of seeking accreditation. What it does is that it enables you as an organization to be seen as credible. And indeed, because of your accreditation, your credibility is verified. So to the extent that you are an exporter and you want to send produce abroad, we are broadcasting to you from the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. So you do understand the importance of building industry. Climate change is important. We're not doing one over the other. And so while we do that, we want to ensure that the nature of your produce, the quality of what you are producing is of the highest international standards. And you have that with accreditation. So accreditation is important. We want you to contact the Jamaica National Agency for Accreditation to find out more on how it is that you can get that accreditation to confirm the competence of your organization with regards to the products that you offer. Now, the question is here. We have a question from Roxine Green, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm just going to go ahead and ask her question, Roxine Green. All right, so Roxine wants to find out, she says, well, first of all, this is an excellent forum or discussion. My challenge has been our ability and willingness to enforce the policies and principles we have laid down as protocols to adhere to. What new methodology is there that we could possibly do to increase the level of enforcement of established or implemented policies to safeguard our environment as the local and global climate change? Essentially, what can we do? What can we do more to ensure that there is adherence? Because once you have the policies, that's good, that's wonderful, but the adherence, and I suppose this goes back to the cultural question, doesn't it? Who wants to go with that one?
I know it's going to end up with Mr. McKenzie eventually, but maybe I can share a little bit what we've been seeing at the regional level. We see the request coming that there is lack of enforcement. And then we are asked as UNEP, then we need support in enforcing, but what do we do through a project to improve enforcement? If the policy is there, the legislation is there, the regulations are there, enforcement is usually most effectively done at the national level and at the local level. So it raises the question, exactly why is enforcement not taking place? Is it a political will issue? Is it a resource management issue in terms of human resources? We have seen from a regional level that perhaps there is sometimes value in when there's a harmonized approach to dealing with a particular issue that might be impacting on multiple countries. So we come up with harmonized regulations so that one country is not seen as having a lower regulation or enforcement than another. And that has helped. But ultimately, I'm going to pass the baton over to Mr. McKenzie because it does come down very much to national level enforcement.
Thank you, but unfortunately, we do not have so much more time. We're going to have to close this segment. But I want to thank you, Mr. Corbin, Program Officer with UNEP, UNEP's Cartagena Convention Secretariat, Mr. Frank Comito, Special Advisor and former CEO, Director General of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, Mrs. Eleanor Jones, Chairman and CEO of Environmental Solutions Limited, and Mr. Anthony McKenzie, Director, Environmental Management and Conservation Division at the National Environment and Planning Agency, NEPA. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a pleasure. We want to say thanks to all participants this morning, not just our panelists. The Honorable Minister is actually here right with us in this broadcast. He has been listening, and we want to thank him for staying with us, for joining and for staying with us. Ms. Etty Fellow, Chairman of the International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation. Earlier, you would have heard from her. Also, our CEO at JANAAC, Ms. Sharon May Shirley, and all persons joining in on social media, on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Instagram. Certainly to those who would have joined through the live outside broadcast on RGR 94 FM. My name is Darren Miller, and it has been my pleasure to take you through this part 2 of JANAAC's Accredicast Quality Management Series. At this time, I'm going to be turning over to my colleague, Ms. Gabrielle Andrade Bell. She is the Quality Manager and Lead Assessor with JANAAC. She'll now come to us with a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Darren. Honorable Audley Shaw, Minister of Industry Investment, Minister in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Honorable Dr. Norman Dunn, Minister of State in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Our Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Sansia Bennett-Templer, in the same ministry, Ms. Etty Fellow, Chair of the International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation, Mr. Simon Roberts, Chair of the JANAAC Accreditation Council, and other council members present. Ms. Sharon May Shirley, CEO of JANAAC. Expert panelists, Mr. Christopher Corbin, the Program Coordinator for the UN Environment Program Cartagena Convention Secretariat. Mr. Frank Comito, Special Advisor and former CEO or Director General of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association. Mrs. Eleanor Jones, the Rose Among the Thorns, Chairman and CEO of Environmental Solutions Limited. Mr. Anthony McKenzie, Director of the Environmental Management and Conservation Division of NEPA. The moderator, Mr. Darren Miller, and finally, our specially invited guests and members of the media. It is my pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks for what has been such a lively discussion on such a symbolic day for us here at JANAAC. To the Honorable Audley Shaw, our Minister, thank you for delivering more than just a greeting, but also delivering the message of how connected the climate and the industry are, and highlighting the work of JANAAC in providing support to those affected industries through confidence building accreditation services. And to Ms. Etty Fellow, our Chair of ILAC, on behalf of JANAAC, we'd like to extend appreciation that you were able to join us and deliver on a World Accreditation Day, the message of accreditation and its support to the UN's SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. We recognize you must be very busy on a day like this, and thank you for taking the time to join us. To our CEO, Miss Sharon Shirley, thank you for delivering the warm welcome and continuing to represent not just Jamaica, but the region. You're always at the helm of everything we do, and this activity and its success has been achieved under your guidance. To the expert panelists, one common theme I recognized highlighted through the discussions was the effect climate change had on our economy, that coupling. And though the change may be expensive, it's even more costly to ignore the effects of climate change and address them, particularly when we're talking about more sensitive industries like that of tourism. I'd like to take the time as well to thank the Honorable Dr. Norman Dunn and the Permanent Secretary, Ms. Sancia Bennett Templar from the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, the Chair of the JANAAC Accreditation Council, Mr. Simon Roberts, and other members of the council who were able to attend today and continue to lend their support to all of JANAAC's activities. Darren, our moderator, thank you for asking, as Mr. Corbin called them, the hard questions and expertly navigating through the program and fielding the questions to the panelists on behalf of all of us participants. And finally, to our specially invited guests and members of the media and all who have attended, this activity couldn't have been done without your participation. I believe Mrs. Jones called it a trailblazing Accredicast. Please spread the knowledge gained during this discussion, and happy World Accreditation Day.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. And again, thanks to everyone who tuned in this afternoon for our part 2 of JANAAC's Accredicast Quality Management Series. It doesn't stop here, you know. The discussions have been started, but we want to ensure that they continue right throughout this entire year and into next year, and always, because it's important for us to be able to gauge perspectives, develop solutions as we all work together, not just as a region, but as a global community in this fight for climate change matters and concerns. On behalf of all of us, our team, every single person who would have been a part of this entire production, good afternoon and happy World Accreditation Day. All right. Thank you so much, Minister.
You did a great job.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.